Hello there. Welcome into a Wednesday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on your radio, streaming the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the Extra Sports 1300 app to do your listening. And that app, which is free to download and free to use, is sponsored by Diversus Health, Mental Health, and Well-Being. Course of the program, and I'd love to get your thoughts at 719-247-1313. You could call or text into the show that way. That's kind of a stunner. If you were just listening to Jim Rome talking about what's happening at the University of Michigan with Sharon Moore unceremoniously fired because of some inappropriate behavior with a staffer. Well, not my favorite type of stories to talk about, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Sean Payton spoke today. You'll get some of his thoughts in advance of the Packer game on Sunday, but I would like to start with the Colorado Avalanche. And it seems like every once in a while, these couple of things pop up as a topic of conversation: the shootout and the power play. And both came into focus last night in the Avs shootout loss to the Nashville Predators. You know how I feel about shootouts and their utility and how much I really care about them. But the way last night's shootout went was bizarre. This is not about, the Avs struggling again to beat a team in a shootout. This is about just how odd that shootout was. What happened, if you didn't see it, is that Philip Forsberg, when he was trying to beat Scott Wedgwood, who returned from injury last night, played okay. As Jared Bednar put it, we've seen him play better games. But he stopped Forsberg's shootout attempt. But Forsberg's momentum carries him into Scott Wedgwood. Kind of weird. Don't see that a lot. Forsberg, obviously having played with Wedgwood, nothing malicious there. He's helping Wedgwood up and pat him on the back, letting him know that he basically apologizing for trucking him. So the shootout continues. Scott Wedgwood makes a stop. And then all of a sudden the game stops. And the concussion protocol people, the spotters, say, Scott Wedgwood, you got to come out. After he made a save. So the delay on this is a little bit weird. And they're like, you have to put in Mackenzie Blackwood. They did. He never got an opportunity to do anything because the Preds won the shootout before that because the Avs couldn't beat UC Soros. But I don't think I've ever seen one of those potential concussion spotting happen so late. So it was a little bit bizarre. Now, I won't say the conspiracy theorist in me says this, but I felt like there was there was too much talk about that. Like, did it have any impact on the game whatsoever? No. It was bizarre, so it's worth remarking about it, but the post-game show went on and on and on about that. What did that have to do with the result? It had nothing to do with the result. I think the bigger story of last night is the power play once again coming into focus for the Colorado Avalanche. The really only gripe that you can have right now if you're an Avalanche fan. I think that was the bigger story last night. The Avs did not get a power play goal until the very end of the game, at very end of regulation, I should say. And it was only because, or in large part because, they had a 6-on-4. They had already pulled the goalie to try and get the tying goal. And then Nashville committed a penalty, so the Avs had a 2-man advantage with the empty net. Because 5-on-4, they couldn't score. They had a couple of opportunities before that, did not convert, but they were able to on the 6-on-4. Here's Jared Bednar on the power play, and then I'll get more into my thoughts.
Good on our guys to stick with it. You know, like I liked a couple of our power plays tonight. First one especially, didn't capitalize. Then you kind of get down to the nitty gritty at the end of it. 6-on-5. It was hard working, and we managed the puck well. We had a couple looks, draw a penalty, gives us a little bit more of an advantage for 6-on-4. And I like the fact that we didn't force anything, but we took, a couple good looks at the net, and eventually Cale's shot finds its way through.
And that, what you just heard from Jared Bednar is very similar to what you keep hearing from Jared Bednar. And my question is, and I'm legitimately asking, this is not a rhetorical question. If you have a thought on this, 719-247-1313. At what point do we shift from being process-oriented, which I think is a good thing? We could be too results biased, and sometimes we need to look at the processes, and I understand that they have a new coach and putting in a new system in Dave Haxtell. I shared my concern about Haxtell being the guy to get the Avs power play production where it needs to be. Not a lot has changed my mind. In fact, nothing has. They've drawn the second most penalties. They've had the second most power plays in the league. And yet, after last night, they are tied for the 9th worst power play percentage in the league. Okay, so they've had a lot of opportunities, more than all but one team in the league to this point. When do we start saying, okay, the process, but the result has to get better? When do we make that shift? Is it after the holidays? Because the holidays are here. They're coming up. We got, 3 more weeks in 2025? I mean, we're coming up on that point. If that is the point, and we say once January 1 rolls around, that's when the results of the power play or lack thereof are a bigger deal. But at some point, we're going to have to shift our focus and say, all right, we get it. You liked the team's effort. You liked what they were doing. They didn't score on the power play. Right? And Cale Makar is a big part of this. Last night was his first power play goal since April. He is, all things Avs power play go through him. He's the quarterback of that power play. So if Cale Makar's not producing, then there's a good chance that the entire power play unit is not going to produce. And the way he scored was he kind of faked and froze his defender. His defender kind of moved out of the way enough for him to take a shot, and it ended up getting past UC Saros. So part of the reason why the Avalanche power play has struggled has been because its most important player, Cale Makar, has struggled 5-on-4. But it can't all be put on him. And this is something that the Avs have to get right. They don't have to be elite. It's kind of bizarre to talk about a team that is so dominant 5-on-5 but can't find a way to score power play goals. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you hear it. But it's got to be better than 20th if the Avs are going to win a Stanley Cup. It just has to be. So it's not all on Cale Makar. There are more reasons why this power play is struggling, and this was pointed out in the Denver Post before last night's game. The Avalanche, in high danger chances, rank dead last in the NHL. And what is a high danger chance? Well, there's a formula. I'll spare you all the math. It's not complicated math, but there are a few numbers associated with it. Basically, the closer you are to the goal, the better. And you get additional points towards considering something a high danger chance if you're on a rush or if you get a rebound. You take a shot off of a rebound. Basically, those are what is being considered a high danger chance. Closer you are to the net, the more likely it is to be a high danger chance. And if you have more skaters out there on the rush than your opponent, that helps. And if you get a shot off a rebound, that helps. That's why the entire idea of you got to get to the net front. You got to get to the dirty areas, as they call them. Got to put bodies in front of the net. That's why that is paramount to the success of a power play. And the Avs are not creating those opportunities. And they're not creating a lot of those opportunities 5-on-5 either. But when you have Nathan MacKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, Cale Makar, Marty Necas, on and on and on, you can take worse shots and get goals. Because they're that good. Those players are that good. They're that good as shooters that they can turn not a high danger opportunity into a goal. But on the power play, when the other team is going to pack it in defensively, they aren't going to allow you to get a clear path to shoot from distance towards their goalie. That's when the lack of high danger opportunities that the Avs create becomes a massive problem. And what I'm about to suggest is going to sound weird, but I think it does make sense. And Jared Bednar has been tweaking the lineups out there for the power play. But right now, the Avalanche in general have a team that doesn't take great shots, but they're not great shots by great players. They need to flip that paradigm on the power play. What I am suggesting for the next lineup change, next personnel grouping that Jared Bednar puts out there for a power play, and he did say before the game last night that if the power play is not productive, he'll have to consider yet another change. And he's been trending in the right direction. Right? He's implementing players, and Makar and Necas and MacKinnon are going to be the givens. But the other two players, he's starting to put in guys who get to the net front a little bit more. Right? And he's been doing that. But it's still, the results aren't where they need to be. What the Avs need less of on the power play is talent. What the Avalanche need to try, they have great players that are taking bad shots because they can. because they're Cale Makar, because they're Nathan McKinnon, because they're Marty Necas. What I'm suggesting is they get lesser players that take better shots. I'm talking Ross Colton. I'm talking Jack Drury. I'm talking even Parker Kelly. I'm not saying you have to put all three of them out there on the power play, but those are some of the names that I think that Jared Bednar and Dave Haxtell, who's supposedly in charge of this operation on the power play, they need to consider those guys. They need to go deeper into the roster because those guys in the bottom six, and they've already tried this a little bit with Victor Olofsson. I'm saying you got to lean more into it. It doesn't make sense that a power play unit with Makar and McKinnon and Necas and Landeskog and Nichushkin can't generate power play goals. It sounds really weird, but that's the fact of the matter right now. So I'm saying more of the bottom six guys, more of the guys that have to work harder to score in every situation. Guys that are going to have their mind on, I got to get to the net front. I got to work really hard here. I got to get a really good shot. Now, they're not saying in their head because I'm a lesser player, but it's a subconscious thing that if you are not Nathan McKinnon and the guys on the Avs have an easy, benchmark to look at, easy bar. I'm not Nathan McKinnon, so I got to work a little bit harder. Right? It's like when you're out in the dating world, if you're not as good looking of a person, the personality's got to be on display. Right? You got to up your game in terms of making her laugh. You got to be on your game in terms of conversation. You can't get by with looks. So those are the type of players that the Avs need to get more integrated into this power play. Not talking wholesale changes, but it's the next step in the evolution of this power play to try and figure it out to get some of the lesser talented players on the Avs more involved because they, to me, have the right mindset. They bring to the table what you need on a power play. They're willing to get into the dirty areas. They want to make sure that their shots are the best shots possible. That's what Jared Bednar needs to do if it keeps going down this road. And he's started to already go down it. It's not as crazy as it may sound because he's starting to go deeper in the roster. Doesn't seem like he's going to change Necas or Makar or McKinnon, but the other two guys have started to come from lower and lower on the depth chart. I'm saying go lower. Now, Gavin Brindley's coming back. He might be a good person to involve, and Jared Bednar was involving him. But they need to get, and look, the Avs are supremely talented on every line. Right? So putting in some of the guys I'm mentioning is not like calling up a guy from the minors and plugging him into your top power play. Like, these are really good players for what their spot on the team is. I think that's the direction they need to go. Because as much as Jared Bednar can talk about how the process is right, the results aren't there. So some different ideas need to be thrown out there. But I do think if there's one thing last night that may be a positive sign, it's that Cale Makar was the guy that got the power play goal. Albeit on 6-on-4, so it's an even bigger supposed advantage for the Avs. But Cale Makar was a guy that they had to get going when it comes to the power play. So maybe that's the sign right there, and maybe Cale Makar on the power play is now unlocked, and this team will start trending in the right direction. But if that's not the case, they need to get guys that grind a little bit more on a power play. Because last night I still saw a lot of shots from distance. I still saw a lot of Avs players trying to score highlight reel goals, and that's not what is required on a power play. It's a good problem to have, because what I'm essentially telling you is that the Avs top power play unit is too talented. But you got to do something about that. You have the second most power plays in the league, and you're in the bottom 10 in conversion. And we're on to December 10th. Season's not super young anymore. Got to start seeing the results. Take your thoughts. 719-24-7, 1313. Coming up next, why the Broncos, the Patriots, and some of these other surprise NFL playoff teams have been able to successfully do something that, in theory, we've been pleading with NFL teams to do. That's next here on Extra Sports 1300. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and we want to make it even better with $1,000 towards your winter wish list. You can use it for holiday shopping, travel, a holiday light display, or you can simply just treat yourself. I mean, you're buying gifts for everyone else. Treat yourself this holiday season. To enter this national contest, go to extrasports1300.com for a chance to fulfill your winter wish list. Sponsored by Level Up Falcon, weight loss, hormone therapy, and IVs. Level up your health. Now, there has been a very popular sentiment as quarterback contracts have seemingly exploded. It is, why don't you spend less on quarterbacks so you could put together a more complete roster? Right? And the latest team that was urged to do that was San Francisco. People were begging them, don't pay Brock Purdy, because you're going to start to lose all of these players. And look, two of the players that they had to say goodbye to because they paid Brock Purdy are now on the Denver Broncos. But the problem is, if you don't have a quarterback that can contribute to winning, you have nothing. That's the way the NFL works. You can have a lot of other stuff, but if you don't have a quarterback, and I'm not saying necessarily you have to have the best quarterback, but you got to have one that can contribute to winning on a consistent basis. If you don't have that, you're toast. So it's this balancing act, and I think most teams in the NFL, I say most because there are a couple very interesting examples, but for the most part, teams don't want to be that canary in the coal mine. They don't want to be that team that says, well, we have a quarterback that we can win a lot of games with, but we're just going to let him go and try this grand experiment so everyone else in the league can follow suit if it works, or we're going to be buried and we're going to ruin a good thing we have going if we try this and fail. So there's some opposing forces here that, while the thought is sound to say, to I guess point out that quarterback contracts are exploding, and at some point you can't keep paying these guys top of market. And the number you need to look at is the percentage of the cap. And to illustrate the point, back in 2011, when Peyton Manning signed a deal with the Colts, his contract accounted for 15% of the Colts salary cap. In 2023, when Joe Burrow signed his deal with the Bengals, it accounted for 25% of the cap. So the rise, even though the cap keeps on going up in the NFL, the quarterback contracts are jumping leaps and bounds, not commensurate with that growth. Teams aren't just giving their quarterbacks the difference in the cap. They're going above and beyond, and it's growing at an exponential rate. But what we are seeing here is a really fascinating moment in time in the NFL. Because this year, there is a decent chance that you will not have most of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL even participating in the playoffs. In fact, right now, of the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks, and I'm going to put Deshaun Watson in this, maybe it's a little self-serving to make my point, but he was supposed to be the franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, yes? If you include Watson, only 4 of the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in the league this year are poised to get a playoff spot. Justin Herbert is the third highest paid. Jalen Hurts is the sixth highest paid. And Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love, who the Broncos will play the next 2 Sundays, coincidentally, are both tied for ninth. And you know that all of those quarterbacks are not a sure thing to make the playoffs right now. But as of today, those 4 quarterbacks would be in, and they're all among the 10 highest paid quarterbacks. But on the other end of the spectrum, 4 of the 10 quarterbacks who account for the least amount of the salary cap are also holding down playoff spots and are in better playoff positions than the group I just mentioned. Bo Nix is the third lowest paid starting quarterback in the league. Drake Mays, a little bit higher paid than him, still in the bottom 10. Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud being the others. All of those teams, or at least most of those teams, Denver, New England, and now it really feels like Houston, are definitely going to be in the playoffs. And the Bears currently hold a playoff spot. So right now, you have just as good of a chance in the year 2025 to make the playoffs by one of the 10 lowest paid quarterbacks as you do with one of the 10 highest paid. And why this is coming more into focus this year is because 2 guys in particular that are among the highest paid quarterbacks have been shoo-ins year in and year out to make the postseason, that being Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. You also throw in Joe Burrow, and you go outside the top 10, but not far. You see Josh Allen, whose team is clinging to the final playoff spot in the AFC. So for years, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, pay them whatever they want, and you didn't see a drop-off in play. Kansas City kept making Super Bowls. We know Baltimore's problem in the playoffs, but they kept winning the North. And if it wasn't Baltimore, it was when Joe Burrow was healthy, who's one of the highest-paid quarterbacks in the league. We have these teams that have some of the highest-paid quarterbacks that the cracks in their team are showing. You can watch Kansas City. You can watch Baltimore. You can watch Cincinnati, certainly, and see that there are major flaws in this team that you can attribute to how much their quarterback is being paid. And it hasn't been an issue. People have theorized you got to go cheaper with quarterback, but yet the Kansas City Chiefs were the reigning dynasty. The Baltimore Ravens were always among the Super Bowl contenders. So it's easy for people to theorize that, but what's playing out on the field is that the highest paid quarterbacks are the most dangerous teams, are the most respected teams, are the best teams. So what I'm curious to see moving forward, because right now it's a moment in time. What it feels like to me is the Denver Nuggets, and I can't forget what Josh Kroenke had said about how this team was built under a different CBA, and the new CBA actually cost them. Right? They built up their team under a certain CBA. The super team was still a thing. Paying 3 guys a lot of money was a thing. That's the way people built their rosters, because that's the way they felt like they could win an NBA title. And the proof was in the pudding. Right? When we saw teams that paid 3 guys a lot of money kept winning. Then the new CBA hit, and teams like the Nuggets were penalized. And only until this year were they able to kind of flip it by moving Michael Porter to where they conformed a little bit more with what wins in the current NBA. So this moment in time has the potential to do that to say, well, maybe we need to look at a lot of teams. I don't think they look at saving money at the quarterback position. That's not a luxury. That's a must. Whatever it takes to pay a quarterback, we have to do it. But you're seeing as many teams with low-paid quarterbacks having success, and maybe arguably better success than teams with higher-paid quarterbacks. So finally, this theory that many people have had is playing out. And we'll see where this goes, because this isn't a different CBA. This will be a different mindset. And the teams that are most interesting to me on this front: Seattle, Tampa, Indy. Right? And we know what has happened with Indianapolis in the last few weeks. But for most of this season, Indy has been maybe the biggest story in the AFC. These are teams with the mindset of either because Anthony Richardson didn't work out, or it's a stated thing, especially in Seattle. It feels like this is what they are. After the Russell Wilson trade, they've been trying to do this every single year. And now it's Sam Darnold that they have. There are teams that I think are actually trying to test this theory to see if they can build a Super Bowl contender by saving a few bucks at the most important position. And look, Daniel Jones was playing at a high level. Baker Mayfield was playing at a high level. Sam Darnold has played at a high level. So it's working out for them. Do we see more teams do this? And then fast forward a few years, and let's take Bo Nix's draft class as an example. How many of these guys are going to get second contracts, including Bo Nix? Is J.J. McCarthy going to get a market value contract from the Vikings? Is Michael Penix going to from Atlanta? And I don't even think that Caleb, Bo, or Drake at this point are shoo-ins to get that second contract. But it's really interesting what is playing out right now in the NFL. And what are these teams that aren't paying their quarterbacks doing? Building depth and balancing out their roster. This thought it didn't just come up this year, right? You and I have talked about it in the past, but now there's actual empirical evidence. We have it, especially in the AFC. We have a playoff race going on with a bunch of teams that aren't paying a lot of money for a quarterback. And the teams that are paying a lot are struggling. Baltimore may not make the playoffs. Kansas City's definitely not making the playoffs. Buffalo, we'll see. Cincinnati's out. Could we finally be seeing this tipping point to where teams decide we got to save money here? At this position, as unthinkable as that might be, we got to find a way to save some money here. But the trick of it is you got to find someone that can play. There's a reason why Sam Darnold and up until his injury, Daniel Jones were remarkable stories. There aren't a lot of those quarterbacks hanging around. Jets actually tried one with Justin Fields. It didn't work. So it's a very tough needle to thread here. But are you going to see some teams try to exploit this market inefficiency? Because there's so many teams that if they like their quarterback at all, they're going to lock him up and pay him all the money and say, we have to. Maybe this year with the success of New England, of Denver, and I know those are rookie quarterbacks, and that's always been the thing. But even you have a Seattle or Tampa. We'll see if they can right the ship. No pun intended. But Tampa was a dark horse Super Bowl contender. I think Seattle has taken that mantle from them in the NFC. And they're doing it. They're not paying their quarterbacks nothing, but they're not paying them what Cincinnati, Kansas City, Baltimore, and some of these other teams are paying their guys. Could we be seeing a shift like we have seen in the NBA, where it's not so much about the stars? You need one of them, you need two of them, can't go without, but much more emphasis on building depth in a more well-balanced, well-rounded team. 719-24-7, 1313, more Drive Time Sports after this. Welcome back, Drive Time Sports. If you're watching the show on our social media platforms, very much appreciated. And an added bonus of doing that, you can comment right there on the day's topics, like Brian has put his comment up on the screen so you can read it in full. But for our radio audience, says, ever since the Avs and Nuggets won their titles in 22 and 23, they start their season strong and then start to go downhill, and then they get a spot in the playoffs, and then they fall apart and the season's over. Seems like the Nuggets are walking that path again, and after last night, are the Avs tracking that same path too? I would say no. I think that's the good news I can give you, Brian, is that I don't think that is what is going on. I think you are correct in identifying some of the recent trends from these two teams over the last couple of years, but don't forget what, and it kind of plays into what I just got done talking about, these teams that are not investing as much in the quarterback position and investing in a lot of other positions are actually succeeding over the teams that have paid these superstar QBs over the years. Chris McFarland and now Ben Tenzer and John Wallace, the co-front office, however you want to describe them, with the Nuggets, they have stemmed the tide a little bit on this trend. They have both identified, and what, we talk about the NBA, but the NHL, Chris McFarland has identified this same thing is happening in the NHL. I think both front offices just in the last calendar year have made the effort to get with the times. Right? The Mikko Rantanen trade, most notably for the Avs, started a domino effect of Chris McFarland building a deeper team. And then this offseason, the trade of Michael Porter Jr. did the same for the Denver Nuggets. What I am talking about when it comes to, and part of the Nuggets right now is injuries, right? And that's the thing that is outside of all of this stuff. If you got a bunch of key players hurt, the depth that you have on your team matters less, and that's a different circumstance. And I think that's has a lot to do with what you see from the Nuggets right now. With the Avs, I can acknowledge that this is a little bit nitpicky because the goaltending's been good. McKinnon's playing at an MVP level, and Natchez is having a career year. There's very little to point out with the Avalanche and say this isn't working. What the power play or the lack of production on a power play will ultimately cost the Colorado Avalanche is, I'll put it this way. I don't think that the Avalanche can be the 20th best power play and win a Stanley Cup. How do I foresee a lot of teams in the NHL that can beat the Colorado Avalanche in a 7-game series? I don't. Same thing when the Nuggets are healthy. I don't see a lot of teams in the NBA that can beat the Nuggets in a 7-game series. But if we're talking about a Western Conference final against Dallas or a series against Dallas, again, the NHL format is so dumb for their playoffs. I hate it. I don't know when Dallas would play. If they have the top 2 records, are they going to play in the first round again? They're not. But would they meet each other right after or whatever? We'll sort that out as time goes on. But it's not going to cost them in the way that it's cost them in recent years. Right? We're talking about this potentially tipping a Stanley Cup final away from the Avs or a Western Conference final. What I bring up in the first segment is not to incite panic. The Avs are still a wagon right now, even with this kind of wart that they have on their team right now. I think there's only one or two teams in the NHL that I think can be a match for the Avs. I'd say the same thing about. I think it's a different conversation than in previous years because of the changes that both the Avalanche and the Nuggets have made. And those changes were viewed as necessary because they were losing in a different way. They were losing because they didn't have depth. The Nuggets were losing because more talent was walking out the front door than coming through it since they won a title. Kind of the same thing with the Avalanche. And now these two major trades that have occurred in the last year have allowed the Avs and the Nuggets to be built to conform to what we believe wins in those two leagues in the year 2025, 2026. So don't panic just yet, Brian, but certainly the power play of the Colorado Avalanche needs to get fixed. It just has to. And at some point, the fact that they're doing the right things, quote unquote, that the effort is there does not matter as much. And it's more about the results. And I think we're approaching that moment very quickly with the Colorado Avalanche. 719-247-1313. Coming up next, Sean Payton on whether the Broncos offense is getting better down the stretch of this season. Welcome in hour 2 on this Wednesday. Appreciate you watching the show, as many of you are on our social media platforms, whether it be YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. If you put at XTRA Sports 1300, you'll be able to get there and watch the show. While you're there, like, subscribe, follow, and most importantly, drop a comment, as Brian did in hour number 1 with his thoughts on the Nuggets and the Avalanche. This is an interactive experience. Now, if you are not watching the show and you would like to interact a different way, you can certainly do that by calling or texting in at 719-247-1313. Now, remember the week leading up to the Kansas City Chiefs game. One thing that I pointed out in the wake of one of the, you have to say, even in a win, one of the worst performances by the Denver Broncos all season against the Raiders, that Bo Nix, and by extension the offense, was regressing from what they had done previously. Over the last month, leading up to the Kansas City game, this was an offense and a quarterback that was trending in the wrong direction, culminating in an absolutely dreadful Thursday night football game, almost unwatchable. And that was enough reason to raise some alarm bells going into the biggest game of the year, and then looking beyond that at a pretty strong schedule the rest of the way. Well, now let's fast forward 3 weeks later and sit here today. Over the last 3 games, all Denver wins, all putting up points. The Denver Broncos, in terms of yards, 7th best offense in the National Football League over the last 3 weeks. Here's Sean Payton on whether the efficiency of his offense has gotten better over these last few weeks.
There was markable gains in comparing to the last time we played him, how we played him, and it was a little bit more on our terms, and we were able to some degree to control the game. And sometimes games can unfold differently, but yeah, last week was good. Certainly a good week in a lot of areas.
And that was the biggest thing that I mentioned going into the Raider game was, here's a chance for the Denver Broncos to show, I mean, they're better than what they showed against the Raiders. I think we all could agree on that. But the idea that they can make the necessary adjustments and put together a better performance than that game, and they did that. But you can also throw in the Washington game and the Kansas City game, as now the trend is going the other way. And you could argue at a better time. Right? At the later in the season you're trending up, the better. And that's what the Denver Broncos are. And it's also really good timing because it's not just one game, which you could certainly put this Green Bay game against almost any on their schedule in terms of degree of difficulty with the opponent. Anyway, the game is at home. But you have the most difficult stretch of games I think that the Broncos have had all season. So just as I pointed out as not a good thing that the Broncos were trending down going into what at the time was their biggest game of the year at home against Kansas City, now going into one of their most difficult games with Green Bay, they're trending up. And trending up going into 4 pretty tricky games. Home against Green Bay, home against Jacksonville, at Kansas City, and home against the Chargers to close out the regular season. Now, you can look at a game being against Washington and a game being against Vegas, and you can look at where the Kansas City Chiefs are right now and say perhaps even 2 weeks later that win is not as impressive. But that's the way that the Broncos schedule has fallen. Right? That old saying that you can only play who's in front of you. And that's what makes Sunday and the next 4 weeks so interesting with this Denver Broncos team. And while maybe one win or one loss down the stretch does not completely alter your perspective about this team, perhaps a really rough final month of the season or really great final month of the season could change your perspective about the Denver Broncos. So just as I pointed out the trend going into the Kansas City game, I'm just pointing out the trend. The fact was going into Kansas City that Bo Nix and the Broncos offense was going down, 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 down. And now going into the Green Bay game, the offense is going up, 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 up. And now it's a chance, whereas against Kansas City, it was a chance to kind of turn it around. Right? And what a great time to turn it around against the reigning, defending, over and over division champions. Now they have a chance to show, because I don't begrudge anybody for pointing out that they played the Raiders and the Commanders during this stretch. And I don't begrudge anyone to say, you know what, Kansas City, even 2 weeks after that game, is not even as good as I thought they were a couple weeks ago. That's all fair. But that's why Sunday and beyond presents a great opportunity for the Broncos to show that whatever they've needed to figure out, they figured it out. And now they get to put it on display against one of the NFL's best teams. And we've talked about mostly with Bo Nix, but we can extend this to the offense. If you're not quite there yet with the Denver Broncos in terms of making a deep playoff run, that you're kind of looking for something more. I wonder what Marvin Mims' role is going to be these last 4 weeks. And a big reason why he's at the top of my mind is because today he was named the AFC Special Teams Player of the Week, and deservedly so, had that punt return for a touchdown against the Raiders. But we know that Marvin Mims, when we talk about what additional level can the Broncos offense get to, if we're talking about how dynamic they can be, Marvin Mims is kind of the guy you look to and go, okay, because the first order of business was getting RJ Harvey going, right? Establishing him as a worthwhile fill-in for J.K. Dobbins, that you could do a lot of the same things in the running game with Harvey that you did with Dobbins. And Sunday was a sign that maybe they can. Green Bay is going to be a different beast, and they're going to have to prove it again. That was the first order of business, the identity of this team, the meat and potatoes of this Broncos offense. They were able to get back to that against the Raiders on Sunday. Now it's, okay, can you add to that? You're back to what you were offensively before J.K. Dobbins got hurt. Not exactly, but you had a very productive run game, over 150 yards rushing, but throughout the entire team, but RJ Harvey was very good. Now it's okay. What additional thing can you bring to the table to make you a more dynamic offense? And I think Marvin Mims is kind of the answer to that question. You look at Mims over the last 4 weeks. Okay, you know, he had a big game against the Giants in that, and he made key plays in that ridiculously crazy fourth quarter. Since then, Marvin Mims has had 0 catches on 1 target, 0 catches on 0 targets against the Chiefs. He caught both of the passes directed at him against Washington, but they only went for 8 total yards. And on Sunday, he made 1 catch for 5 yards on 1 target. That's really the column that I look at as, I don't want to say concerning, but the one that draws my attention, not necessarily the catches, the targets. 1, 0, 2, 1 for a guy that up until that point had 7 targets, 3 targets, 5, 6, 4. So Marvin Mims was, and look, with Marvin Mims, there's an equilibrium here that the Broncos have to hit. If he is like Percy Harvin, he's not a guy that you're going to throw the ball to as much as you throw to Cortland Sutton. Right? He's not that kind of receiver, and it actually kind of takes away from what he brings to the table when you're constantly trying to feed him the football. There is a little bit of surprise that goes along with Marvin Mims. Right? It's you want to use him on big downs. You want to use him for a change of pace. You want to use him to perhaps catch the other team by surprise. He's not a go-to receiver. But if they have reestablished their running game through RJ Harvey now rather than J.K. Dobbins, now it's, can you add to it? And Marvin Mims is the guy to me that adds that dimension that make the Broncos offense a lot more dynamic. Now, the question wasn't specifically about Marvin Mims, but just about the idea of involving certain players at certain times. Here's Sean Payton about getting those different players involved.
I just think it's important that, you know, the skilled players understand there's certain plays that we put in today, for instance, for certain players, but you know, there's some weeks that it'll just, the ball travel differently based on the looks. But I think in all 3 phases, I think it's a close team.
Yeah. And this isn't, don't even think we need to get into, you know, Jerry Jeudy's not on this team anymore. I don't expect any one of these guys on the Denver Broncos, while they're in the middle of chasing down the top seed in the AFC, are going to be, you know, giving Bo Nix an earful or complaining about their touches. That's not what this group is about, to their credit. This group is built this way by design. As you well know, with Sean Payton, he does not want to deal with the diva-like nature of NFL wide receivers. And he has a bunch of selfless, whatever I can do to help the team type of skill position players. But that doesn't mean he shouldn't find a way to involve some of these guys a little bit more. And Marvin Mims, to me, feels like that guy. I understand Evan Ingram's role. It's what we saw against Washington is not going to be Evan Ingram every week. Cortland Sutton is Cortland Sutton. His role is the only one that's cemented. He should get his looks all the time. But who can be kind of that next guy that the Broncos look to, even if it's not on an every down basis or every drive basis? It's Marvin Mims. I don't think that the Broncos can take their game to another level offensively if Marvin Mims is getting targeted once, 0 times, twice, and once. They haven't reached that equilibrium. Maybe it's not 7 targets like he had against the Giants, but you know the way that game went, everything was out the window, and it's just whatever's going to work on the next play. But 4, 5, that might be the sweet spot for Marvin Mims. I think he has been pretty quiet lately. Nobody said much because the Broncos keep winning. But his punt return for a touchdown against Vegas on Sunday was kind of the thing that made me go, yeah, where's Marvin Mims offensively, though? I think there needs to be more Marvin Mims down the stretch. And hey, if he can return a punt for a touchdown every week, that would be great too. But I think he needs to be a bigger part of the Broncos offense down the stretch than he has been the last month. Doesn't have to be the go-to guy. That's Courtland Sutton in this Broncos offense, but more than once or 0 times a game. I think that's what the Broncos will need if they're going to run through this last month with a 4-0, 3-1 record. That dynamism with Marvin Mims. Take your thoughts. 719-247-1313. Bizarre story. Disappointing story. Kind of icky story. Out of the University of Michigan. That's next here on Extra Sports 1300. Does it feel like to anybody else that perhaps Michigan sold their soul for that national championship and the bill has come due every year since? Kind of feels that way to me. And that's a cosmic thing. You can't prove that. But think about what has happened with the University of Michigan after they won their title, right? A title that was earned in a questionable way. Now, I want to re-legislate Connor Stallions and whatever. The fact of the matter was they were doing something wrong. You could say that it meant everything to their national championship run or nothing if you want, but they cheated. That's what they did during that season. And they ended up either as a direct result of it or by pure happenstance, completely independent of it, they won a national championship. And since then, this team has been down. They lost Jim Harbaugh. And now Sharon Moore, who succeeded Harbaugh, has been fired for a reported relationship with a staffer. Guess the way the interwebs will describe it, following credible evidence of an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. And that apparently is against the rules at the University of Michigan. And the next domino to fall could be Bryce Underwood going to LSU. At least it's been theorized, and it is college football in the transfer portal, so you can never rule anything out. But it does feel that way a little bit, right? That Michigan sold their souls for a national title, and now they've had to pay the piper a little bit recently. Has not been a good run post-national championship for Michigan. And now, even with their struggles, pretty high-profile job just came open. So we already went through the craziness of, Lane Kiffin and all that nonsense with him going to LSU. Florida got their coach. I mean, those are the schools that I don't know if they fear Michigan, but just the idea that they got their next head coach in place before this job came open, I think they'll be happy about that at the very least. So where does Michigan go after this? Certainly you would think that they would try to poach somebody. I mean, clearly the apple fell pretty far from the tree when it comes to Harbaugh to Sharon Moore. You want to go deeper into that rabbit hole and get Sharon Moore's top assistant to be your next head coach? So with everything going on in college football right now, another bomb is dropped in one of the most prestigious institutions in America, which Michigan is, and one of the highest profile football programs in this country, which Michigan is, even with their lack of success after winning the national championship. This is now in with We got a Heisman Trophy to give out. Are still arguing about who deserved to get into the college football playoff. We still got the Notre Dame, woe is me tour that's continuing. And now Michigan needs a new football coach. Which just the fact that it's Michigan, not enough to keep Bryce Underwood in Ann Arbor. Because it's not enough to keep any quarterback tethered to a program. These guys, with Underwood being, his ties there, I mean, maybe his bond to the university is a little bit stronger. He's not quite a mercenary like a lot of these other college quarterbacks are. But I mean, if Bryce Underwood doesn't, for whatever reason, like the next head coach, think that if he believes that, man, this is a mess right now, I got to get out of here. Michigan's got to get this right, whether it's a promotion or they hire from the outside. If I'm a Wolverines fan, I'm thinking about Bryce Underwood, and I'm going, I hope that whoever Michigan hires, Bryce Underwood likes. Because that's the only path for Michigan to get back to where they were under Harbaugh, is if they have Bryce Underwood as their quarterback. So Sharon Moore fired for cause after Michigan found credible evidence of an inappropriate relationship with a staffer. Is it just they don't allow office romances, or is there a little bit more to this? Stay tuned. I would hope it just ends with, hey, we don't allow that around here, or perhaps this was, a married staff member. I don't know. I don't want to theorize. The fact of the matter is, what Sharon Moore did was enough to get fired for cause. But I'm sure we will find out the nature of this relationship and all the gory details as the weeks go on. This text came in from Scott earlier. Couldn't find the right place to bring this up now that I'm talking college football, kind of. It's a good time. Scott says, can't say I don't enjoy it, but isn't there a chancellor or president at Notre Dame that will stop the embarrassing and pathetic comments of Bavakwa, their athletic director? I mean, they exist, but I think you have to, I think at the very least you say there are people at Notre Dame, and we just talked about Michigan. There are some institutions where the people who rank higher than the athletic director don't want to, shall we say, get their hands dirty. Like that stuff's beneath them to complain, I would say. But I think the other question is, does Notre Dame want Bavakwa to stop talking? I mean, the premise of your question would be making the assumption that the people who rank above Bavakwa at Notre Dame are not okay with this complaining tour he's going on. I know everyone's piling on Notre Dame right now. I don't know if Notre Dame feels like in the end this is a bad thing. I mean, look, they did get this whatever letter of intent or whatever the heck Bavakwa is holding up that guarantees them. I mean, how about this? Notre Dame is guaranteed to get a college football playoff spot if they rank in the top 12. What is that? Sorry, we didn't put you in the college football playoff, even though we had the ability to put you in. It was our decision to leave you out. But here's a consolation prize. No matter what your resume says, as long as you're ranked in the top 12, we're automatically going to put you in. How is that okay? But apparently they have it. And now, even though most people are on the side of the ACC, I don't know that Notre Dame doesn't have the ACC in a bad spot now. With all of this stuff about they were sending out tweets that were making it seem like we didn't deserve to get in. I don't know. Could we see Notre Dame leverage this? And I don't know what more of a sweetheart deal they can get from the ACC, but maybe there's some other way that they can get an even better deal with the ACC. Or maybe they use this to bolt the ACC. Take their non-football sports and go somewhere else. I mean, a conspiracy theorist would say this is all very orchestrated because Notre Dame doesn't want to stay in the ACC. I don't see any evidence to say that's the case. But if we wanted to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further, I could see where some tinfoiled hat wearing people might think that this is all about something bigger. Better deal from the ACC, chance to leave the ACC. I mean, they did get something out of this. They did get that promise, that pinky promise from the College Football Playoff Committee that they're going to be put in as long as they're in the top 12, which I think just further underscores how much of a joke the College Football Playoff Committee is. I mean, we've already talked about the perception that there are biases at play here, most notably for the SEC. And what I can't get over, and this is on Notre Dame, right? This is on Notre Dame. Notre Dame caused this. We should be talking about the viability of Alabama, not Notre Dame and Miami. That should be the conversation. That's the team that you look at and you go, really? And I said this the other day. If I were ranking them, I think Alabama would be in. But the fact that getting absolutely demolished by Georgia had zero impact on their standing within the college football playoff is an absolute joke. And the only explanation is that there is favoritism. I mean, I could see Alabama falling to 11 or 12 and still being in. And I'm a proponent of putting the best teams in. And I think Alabama probably is one of the best 12 teams in America. But the fact that they didn't move at all, I mean, that should have been the story. And it was when the rankings were released, and then Notre Dame went on their woe is me tour, and everyone forgot really quick about Alabama and shifted their ire towards Notre Dame, and deservedly so. But to get back to your text, Scott, I think you're making an assumption that the higher ups at Notre Dame don't think this is what's in the best interest of their institution. We look at it and say, what a bad look. They're literally taking their ball and going home. And they're using this ridiculous excuse of, the guy's got to study. It's like, okay, what if you were in the college football playoff? Then would you opt out of the college football playoff because your student athletes need to study? Like, it's just been one bad look after another for Notre Dame. That's the way we see it. But in the long run, I mean, they did get the promissory note to make the college football playoff basically no matter what next year. And who knows what their relationship with the ACC is going to look like moving forward. 719-24-7, 1313. Coming up next, you'll hear from the Colts' old new quarterback, Phillip Rivers. Why in the world is he doing this? Don't forget to cast your vote for our Extra Sports Athlete of the Week. 4 incredibly deserving nominees that you can vote for this week. Dylan Arocho of Harrison, who is currently leading the vote, but there is still time. Cole Harris, Palmer Ridge Football, Conley Polsgrove from Pine Creek Hockey, and Sammy Nickel from the Peyton girls basketball team. You can vote for who you think is the most deserving athlete of the week nominee, and I'll reveal the winner on Friday and hopefully be joined by our winner on Friday. It's our Extra Sports Athlete of the Week, sponsored by the fine folks at Blackjack Pizza and Salads. So this is happening. Phillip Rivers back in the NFL, and by golly, because that's the kind of thing that I think Phillip Rivers would say, he might start on Sunday. Got to see how Riley Leonard is. But look, at this point, I don't know the status of Riley Leonard, how the knee's feeling. I think all signs point to Phillip Rivers playing. Mike McDonald of the Seahawks is planning on Phillip Rivers playing. Now he's preparing for all of their quarterbacks, as teams do. I think there's just too much here for Phillip Rivers to not step out on that field. And it's not just that you're bringing a 44-year-old quarterback back after 5 years away from the NFL. You're bringing him back for a team that desperately needs to win a football game. The Colts, just a few weeks ago, had a 99% chance of making the playoffs. This would be one of the most, and you can understand why it happened, right? The factors at play here, but this would be one of the biggest in-season collapses in recent NFL history. You're not doing all this to ease Phillip Rivers back into it, and maybe a couple of weeks we'll see. I think this guy's playing. Here's Phillip Rivers on his kids and how they feel about the whole thing.
They've been very supportive. You know, I think my younger children are most excited. I shouldn't say most excited. They're excited because they don't remember Dad playing. You know, my 6-year-old actually asked me like 4 months ago, like, Dad, why don't you play anymore? And I'm like, Hon, I'm sorry. Best you're going to get is me coaching on the sideline, you know, because they were seeing, you know, highlight or they're pulling up some, you know, old games. My boys are fired up, obviously, but I think share the same sentiment. A little nervous, like, Dad, you think you can do it, you know? And then my older girls are real excited because they're a little bit confused. They're like, shoot, I was 12. You know, some of them, you know, now all of a sudden they're grown adults, married, and they remember 16 years old going to the ball game.
Phillip Rivers has a lot of kids that he has to account for when he's talking about, when somebody asks him, how do your kids feel about it? He's got to go through a lot of them. I have the set of the older girls, and I have the set of the younger girls, and I have the grown-up boys, and I have the young. That's always going to be the jokes with Phillip Rivers. But so they're on board. I asked the question yesterday, and I believe that some part of Phillip Rivers is thinking about the Hall of Fame, cementing his case, making a case. I had this alternative view posed to me today. What if it's, you know, the reset of his Hall of Fame clock, getting away from some of his peers that may be viewed as being more worthy candidates than he. Move the timeline a little bit, go up against a way I'll put it, but be in a class with some different quarterbacks. I have a hard time believing that none of this even enters the brain of Phillip Rivers. But Phillip Rivers was asked in a different way. He wasn't asked about this cementing his Hall of Fame candidacy, but he was asked about the reset of his timeline and whether the fact that he could have been in the Hall of Fame this coming year, and now he has to push it back, entered into his thought process at all.
That's just not. I'm not holding my breath on that, and I'm not. Hey, I hadn't been counting down the years. I mean, and with all respect to the Hall, if one day I can be a part of that group, it will be special, no question about it. But the extension of that time, if that comes to be, was not a factor.
So he's not really answering my claim. And unfortunately, I was not able to make it to Indianapolis today to ask him my question. And again, it's not a criticism. I'm not criticizing Phillip Rivers. All I'm saying is you are now on the cusp of making the Hall of Fame. I got to imagine you're thinking about your legacy a little bit and starting to wonder. Like, he says he's not. You can believe him. He also said something today, just another thing Phillip Rivers said, just so you can gauge whether Phillip Rivers is being truthful. He had another quote today about his role with this team, and I will read it for you. He said, "Shoot, we're going to run the crap out of the ball and go from there. We'll see what I can do, but I'm not here to be the savior." Does that sound like the honest and whole truth? This is Phillip Rivers we're talking about. You think he's coming back just so he can hand the ball to Jonathan Taylor? I guess I'll bring up the Costanza line. It's not a lie if you believe it's true. I think Phillip Rivers believes in his head he's not coming back to be the savior, and that he's fine just handing it off. And I think he believes that he doesn't care that much about the Hall of Fame. I think he does. And I think he's coming back and he plans on throwing the football. Because if I'm Seattle or any one of these teams, already there was the thought of, I said this when the Broncos played the Colts way back in week whatever it was. You got to stop Jonathan Taylor. That's job one. Now teams are going to double down on that. Right? When Daniel Jones, we didn't really know if we could believe in the Daniel Jones story. That's when the Broncos played the Colts. And it was like, well, let's see if Daniel Jones can beat us. That was the mentality. And then to Daniel Jones' credit, he played great. Colts kept winning. And you had to respect him more. Well, now it's right back to what it was at the beginning of the season. 44-year-old Phillip Rivers, yeah, we'll take our chances. That's got to be Seattle's mentality. It's got to be San Francisco's. It's got to be all these teams that they're playing down the stretch. I mean, how could you not load up in the box even more to stop Jonathan Taylor? So whether Phillip Rivers has any designs on slinging the ball around the yard or not, he's probably going to be forced to. So I don't know that I buy that the Hall of Fame is the furthest thing from his mind. Again, not a criticism. I think if I were up for any kind of Hall of Fame, it would be on my mind, at least in part. Not the main motivation. The guy's got a great life. He's 44 years old. He has a ton of kids, and he's got grandkids. And look, it's got to be love of the game first, and I understand that. But some part of Phillip Rivers' brain is thinking about the Hall of Fame. I promise you. And no one can talk me off of this. And no one can convince me that Phillip Rivers doesn't have a thought that he's going to come out and sling it around. And the Colts are going to need him to. Right? Not 40 or 50 times a game, but Phillip Rivers is going to have to throw the football for the Colts to save their season. They can't run the single wing. And if they were just going to hand it off to Jonathan Taylor, no matter what, they might as well play Riley Leonard on one leg. They might as well put our old friend Brett Rippon in there. If all it is handing it off to Jonathan Taylor, they have to throw the football. And it's going to be fascinating. And I think he's going to be on the field on Sunday. Phillip Rivers may not look at himself like the savior of the Indianapolis Colts, but he's going to have to be. And if they do get in the playoffs, he's going to be proclaimed the savior of this Colts team. And in 5 years, it will be a part of the conversation when he is up once again for induction into Canton. Guys, you know when something just feels off, you're tired, your motivation's gone, you're not performing like you used to at work, at home, or in the gym. It may not be just aging. It could be low testosterone. That's where Synergenics and Low T Center come in. Their testosterone replacement therapy has helped thousands of men feel like themselves again. And I've heard guys say that it changed their life, because it does. If you're not yourself, your life is different. You get back to being your old self. Life changer, game changer. And here's the best part. You could start with a free testosterone test. No cost, no pressure, just answers. Don't let this be another thing you keep putting off. If you're like me, you put off a lot of things in your life. Don't make this one of those. The best version of you is out there, full of energy, confidence, and drive, but you got to take the first step. Go to trtmvp.com. That's trtmvp.com and book your free test today. The best you is waiting. I will have to bid you adieu. I'll be pinch hitting for Jim Arthur on the Joe Scott show coming up at 6:30. Come join us at Ribbon Chop House. Be happy to see you. Hang out. Talk some hoops. And then I'll talk to you tomorrow at 3 right here on Extra Sports 1300.